Video contains violent content, details that are not suitable for common perception. Please consider before watching. Chapter 169, Cho Taechong 1. After traveling a considerable distance using lightness skill, Mok Jae-eun stopped. It was none other than the vicinity of the high tower where the Primal Killing Pavilion estate was located. The high tower, known as the tallest building in the inner city except for the main hall where the society leader resided, was attached to the Primal Killing Pavilion estate. Therefore, although Mok Jae-eun didn't completely know the layout of the inner city yet, it wasn't too difficult for him to find it. Chong Ryong's voice reached Mok Jae-eun's ears. Mortal. Aren't you going too far? Too far. Even if you've crossed the threshold, if something like earlier happens again, you might even die instead. Chong Ryong was concerned about the previous situation. That strange technique that had immobilized even the rapidly strengthened Mok Jae-eun. If he were to be caught in it and have his neck slashed, it would lead to an irreversible situation. It's not too late yet. Let's go back. No. If we go back, it'll be too late. It's too late. Someone capable of using such a strange technique, who knows what they might do. Mok Jae-eun was concerned about a different aspect than Chong Ryong. If it was something that could be dealt with to some extent, there was no need to rush. However, if it was a technique that was completely impossible to deal with, taking the initiative first was the answer. Mok Jae-eun thought they needed to handle it before the other party could do anything. Goodness, you really don't listen at times like this, mortal. Chong Ryong clicked her tongue. Once this mortal fellow made up his mind, he never yielded. Unless she manifested and forcibly dragged him away, there was probably no way to dissuade him. So Chong Ryong said, "There's no other choice. Avoid a direct confrontation. If they went in directly, it would be equivalent to letting the other party know they had come. To make it difficult to see with the naked eye, he had been moving through dense shadows the entire way. Since crossing the threshold, it had become difficult for ordinary people to sense his presence. So the guards standing in front of the estate were chatting among themselves, unaware that he was nearby. Fortunately, night has fallen. At night there are fewer people wandering around and more places to hide." Mok Jae-eun opened his spiritual sense and focused on his spiritual eye. It was to identify the most convenient route. Whoosh. Ho. When he opened his spiritual eye, he saw two energies at the early stage of the transcendent realm beyond the wall. To have two experts of the transcendent realm stationed here. The early stage of the transcendent realm was almost equivalent to the level of a grandmaster. As Jongju had said, it seemed to be true that the society leader valued the Primal Killing Pavilion and was thorough with security. Moreover, most of the energies of the martial artists guarding the estate were at least first-rate experts or higher. If one were to infiltrate out of mere curiosity, there was a high probability of suffering a setback. Of course, Mok Jae-eun didn't mind that at all now. Swish. Mok Jae-eun's figure dispersed like mist. It was the clear and manifest water crossing steps he had stolen from eldest young master Na Yul Riang. The clear and manifest water crossing steps, when deliberately used, was so fast that it was difficult to detect with the naked eye, making it challenging even for experts of the transcendent realm to easily notice. Swish. Mok Jae-eun instantly crossed the wall and entered. Then he quickly moved through the estate. There were a total of 15 buildings inside the estate. Among them, the diviner who had used that bizarre technique beyond common sense on him would be present. "Are you planning to search each one by one?" "I have to. But since that would take a lot of time, I should start with the main hall." "Main hall?" "Yes. A diviner with immense curse power capable of detecting even Chong Ryong's energy couldn't possibly be an ordinary person. He speculated that they would be at least an executive-level figure within the Primal Killing Pavilion. Wouldn't it be easier to find them if you tell that Zhou Yuigong fellow about their appearance?" "Ho. That's a good idea." Mok Jae-eun agreed with Chong Ryong's suggestion. Zhou Yuigong, who had become the pavilion master by overthrowing his former master and previous Primal Killing Pavilion master in Seok. Then he would immediately find out who this person was. So Mok Jae-eun headed straight to the main hall building. Swish. Throughout his use of the clear and manifest water crossing steps, no one noticed Mok Jae-eun's movements. Before long, Mok Jae-eun reached the main hall of the Primal Killing Pavilion. Arriving in front of the main hall, Mok Jae-eun surveyed the surroundings and sought a way to enter. 2 at the entrance. 2 experts at the Peak Realm were guarding it. Since the door was closed, it was difficult to enter without them noticing. Then he spotted an open window on the second floor of the main hall. Although there were first-rate experts presumed to be escort warriors on the second-floor corridor, fortunately, there was no such person at the open window. Tap, tap. Mok Jung-un formed a hand seal and used the 6-in boundary technique. The 6-in boundary technique was to detect curse power and prepare for any possible exorcism techniques. A faint curse power was felt from the open window. It seemed that an exorcism technique was set up. The only answer is to disable the technique simultaneously with entering. Tap, tap. Hariti Madra. Mok Jung-un, who had formed a hand seal by bending his thumb and joining 3 fingers, chanted a technique of release and used the clear and manifest water crossing steps to insert his body into the open window while running upside down under the third-floor roof. At the same time, Mok Jung-un changed his hand seal to a sword seal. Urgent and speedy. Release. As he extended the sword seal forward, the surroundings became quiet. Although it seemed as if nothing had happened, the 9 talismans attached to the wall crumbled into ashes. Sizzle. The 9 shadows binding technique? It was an exorcism technique where 9 shadows bound the intruder and pierced holes in their limbs. It was quite an aggressive technique. As expected, the fact that it was set up meant that the window was intentionally left open. However, it didn't matter. Swish. Mok Jung-un used the clear and manifest water crossing steps again and moved through the corridor. There were a total of 6 guard warriors guarding the second-floor corridor. They were all at the first-rate level, but none of them were particularly a hindrance to Mok Jung-un. Swish. Mok Jung-un quickly moved while disabling the exorcism formations set up intermittently, and immediately went up the stairs to the upper floor. Arriving at the third-floor corridor, Mok Jung-un paused for a moment. There was a cloud bridge connecting to the high tower. Judging from the fact that it was set up for direct movement from the third floor, it seemed that the high tower was also used by the executives within the primal killing pavilion. However, it was strange. Why are you stopping? At Chong Ryong's question, Mok Jung-un surveyed the surroundings and said, I don't sense any energy. You don't sense any energy? Yes. The main hall building had up to 4 floors. He knew that the pavilion master's room was on the 4th floor, but there was no one guarding the 3rd floor. Mok Jung-un's spiritual sense had become even more sensitive since crossing the threshold. However, on this floor there were no traps or guards to be seen. That made him even more wary. Mok Jung-un looked up. A single energy was felt on the upper floor. It was very familiar, belonging to the current pavilion master, Zhou Yuigong. Mok Jung-un, who had been carefully examining the surroundings, finally went upstairs. After all, Pavilion Master Zhou Yuigong was superficially his master, and being bound by the enslavement chain he was no different from a slave, so he had no choice but to follow Mok Jung-un's orders. Swish. Mok Jung-un stood in front of the Pavilion Master's room. Mok Jung-un, preparing for any unforeseen circumstances, briefly formed the Hariti Mudra with his left hand and opened the door to the Pavilion Master's room with his right hand. Creak. As the door opened and Mok Jung-un entered, his eyes narrowed. The reason was illusion technique. An illusion technique was being used before his eyes. Ordinary illusion techniques didn't work on Mok Jung-un, who had opened his spiritual eye. It was because he could see that it was a false image created by curse power. The scene shown by the illusion technique depicted Pavilion Master Zhou Yuigong sitting at his desk in the office. However, in reality, inside, Zhou Yuigong was seen naked with his limbs bound, looking dazed. Hee-hee-ha. Zhou Yuigong wriggled his body and let out a bizarre laugh. But his expression was distorted as if in pain. We've been discovered. It seems so. There was no way he would be in such a miserable state otherwise. Mok Jung-un formed a hand seal and lightly waved his hand while chanting a technique of release. Swish. Then the illusion technique that had been set at the entrance of the Pavilion Master's room was dispelled. As the illusion technique was released, the overlapping scene before his eyes disappeared, and the current Pavilion Master Zhou Yuigong's appearance, with his limbs restrained, became clear. Wait. Don't approach him. At Chong Ryong's words, Mok Jung-un stopped in his tracks. Even without her warning, he would have stopped because he had discovered something. It was because of Zhou Yuigong. Squirm. Rumble. Ugh, haha. Zhou Yuigong's skin bulged out and something was moving inside. Its shape was quite revolting, resembling a centipede. It was crawling all over Zhou Yuigong's skin, and whenever it did, Zhou Yuigong seemed to be in pain, bleeding and suffering. However, this wasn't just one. There seemed to be dozens, no hundreds of them crawling all over his body. How vicious! With those things burrowing into his entire body and feeding on him, it was only natural for him to lose his mind like that. Mok Jiangun's eyes sharpened as he looked at the enslavement chain on Zhou Yuigong's arm. The enslavement chain had dug into Zhou Yuigong's wrist. He must have fought against the restraints of the chain. It seems so. The one who had reduced Zhou Yuigong to this state must have tried to find out who had placed the enslavement chain on him. That's why they had committed such an act. However, once bound by the enslavement chain, one could never betray. Therefore, as the techniques clashed, it seemed to have left Zhou Yuigong in such a devastated state. Can you remove it? At Chang Ryong's question, Mok Jiangun shook his head. He had never seen such a technique before. It was rather impressive that Zhou Yuigong hadn't died despite having such a large number of bugs crawling all over his skin. It seems to be that guy. That guy? You mean him? Yes. The existence that had immediately noticed Chang Ryong's presence and changed course with a technique that had taken away all of Mok Jiangun's sensations except for his consciousness. It seemed that existence had reduced Zhou Yuigong to this state. Ah! Mok Jiangun, who had been staring intently at Zhou Yuigong, drew a line with his sword finger. Swish. Then a sharp murderous intent sliced through the air of the pavilion master's room. Along with it, a red line appeared on Zhou Yuigong's neck and then... slide. Thud. His head fell to the floor. Mok Jiangun let out a soft breath. Since he no longer had any value as a pawn, the only thing he could do for him was to end his life mercifully. If he tried to forcibly keep him alive, it would only hold him back. Mok Jiangun chuckled. It's not as easy as I thought. The exorcism skills of Zhou Yuigong, who had earned the title of Moon Level, were unrivaled among the diviners he had encountered. For someone like him to be so helplessly defeated. Now he had a rough idea. The existence that had reduced Zhou Yuigong to this state and chased them to their doorstep after detecting Chang Ryong's spiritual power. Is it the one called Cho Taechong? The person Zhou Yuigong had been afraid of, his senior brother. He seemed to be the most likely candidate. Senior brother Cho Taechong possesses curse power comparable to our master. He is an existence I cannot possibly handle. Those were the words Zhou Yuigong had said to him. Since he had subdued the previous primal killing pavilion master in Sioke, Mok Jiangun thought Zhou Yuigong would be able to sufficiently resist if he made full preparations. However, it seemed he had underestimated him. He might be an even more troublesome diviner than the arrogant and elderly Insio. Perhaps he was an even stronger diviner than Zhou Yuigong had anticipated. If I don't kill him now, he'll be a nuisance. Murderous intent flickered in Mok Jiangun's eyes. It was at that very moment. Thump. The sound of footsteps echoed in Mok Jiangun's ears. Thump. The moment he heard the second footstep, Mok Jiangun turned his head back. Why are you doing that? It's him. Mok Jiangun's memory was beyond imagination. He could remember even the habits of the other party just by the stride and sound of their footsteps, so he could immediately identify who it was. It was undoubtedly the same existence that had entered the old shrine. Is he coming? Yes. What will you do? I have to kill him. There was no need to hesitate. Even if this existence was a tremendous diviner, the key point was only one. If he killed him before he could use any techniques, that was it. Mok Jiangun's actions were very swift once he made up his mind. Swish. Mok Jiangun's figure dispersed like mist. Along with it, Mok Jiangun, who had used the clear and manifest water crossing steps, ran out of the pavilion master's room and down the corridor using high-speed movement. Swish. To Mok Jiangun, who was using high-speed movement, the existence walking down the corridor was moving at an extremely slow pace, no different from walking. It was that ordinary-looking diviner wearing a gray yin-yang robe. This time, unlike in the shrine, his senses weren't sealed, so the diviner's energy was clearly visible. However, the energy is overlapping? Something was strange. As he approached the guy using high-speed movement, his energy was different from ordinary people. After opening his spiritual eye, the energy became visible, and the guy's energy appeared to be overlapping. It was as if he wasn't a single existence but two together. However, the overlapping energy, unlike the extraordinary curse power, was not much different from ordinary people who hadn't cultivated martial arts in terms of the energy itself. Therefore there wouldn't be much of a problem in killing him. Swish, swish, swish. Mok Jaeongun, who had instantly passed by the diviner and stood right behind him, raised his murderous intent in his sword hand. Since he hadn't cultivated martial arts, the diviner was still walking forward at a very slow pace. So Mok Jaeongun tried to behead him in one strike. Whoosh. But it was at that very moment. The forehead of the slowly walking diviner suddenly split open. Crackle. Then. Startle. For a moment Mok Jaeongun furrowed his brows. The reason was that the small energy overlapping the diviner suddenly surged to an unbelievable level. And that energy was extremely ominous and inauspicious. However, this wouldn't stop Mok Jaeongun. Mok Jaeongun tried to behead the diviner. But just as the murderous intent of his sword hand was about to touch the neck, Kwang. At that moment, something pressed down on Mok Jaeongun's shoulder. Along with it, the floor shattered and Mok Jaeongun's figure fell straight down. Crash. Mok Jaeongun's figure, which had fallen to the third floor, didn't stop there and broke through the floor again, descending further. Mok Jaeongun raised his head and looked at the existence pressing down on him. It was a pair of giant hooves. Between those hooves he saw a pair of ferocious eyes and strange horns. It's the Toru. Chang Ryong hurriedly said to Mok Jaeongun. This was the evil spirit from Mount Kunlun that had been chasing her. As befitting a Imi Mangniang level evil spirit, its demonic power was incomparable to that of fierce beasts or monstrous beasts. Under the pressure of its force, Mok Jaeongun's figure instantly broke through the second floor and fell to the first floor. Crash. Crash. The beast seemed to be trying to crush him to death like this. However, the moment it stepped on the solid first floor, unlike the wooden corridor. Crackle. As the floor cracked in all directions, Mok Jaeongun, who had channeled the crushing force through the soles of his feet, swung his sword hand towards Toru's face. Slash. At that moment, one of Toru's ferocious eyes was split in half and purple blood spurted out. The Toru, with one eye slashed, let out a roar of pain. Roar. The roar created shock waves and shook the surroundings. The walls shattered and it was utter chaos. Along with it, the enraged Imi Mangniang Toru thrashed about, trying to trample Mok Jaeongun, who had cut out its eye with its hooves. What a nuisance. As Mok Jaeongun dodged it and tried to counterattack, it was at that very moment. Clang. Clang. The Toru's hooves were blocked by some invisible barrier. What is this? As he was wondering. Hey you. A pretty short-haired girl in maid attire, with one hand forming a seal, urgently shouted to Mok Jaeongun while gesturing. Follow me right now. Chapter 170 Totechong. Clang. Clang. The Toru's hooves were blocked by some invisible barrier. What is this? Curse power could be felt from the barrier. It was at that moment. Hey you. A pretty short-haired girl in maid attire, with one hand forming a seal, urgently said to Mok Jaeongun while gesturing. Follow me right now. Who are you? Is this the time to ask that? Hurry up. At the girl's words, Mok Jaeongun's eyes narrowed. The curse power emanating from the girl was almost equivalent to the level of moon-level diviner. But why was this girl dressed like this? As he was puzzled, Mok Jaeongun looked up. Roar. Clang. Clang. The Imi Mangniang Toru roared and tried to break through the barrier with its hooves. Mok Jaeongun clicked his tongue inwardly. Things had already escalated, so it seemed wrong to kill the beast. With this level of commotion, people would gather from the surroundings and there would soon be chaos. So Mok Jaeongun said to the girl. All right. But where do you want me to follow you? At Mok Jaeongun's words, the girl, while maintaining the seal with one hand, took something out from her waist with the other hand. She put it on her finger and then rotated it in the air. Swish. Ah. Ah. Surprisingly, something like smoke flowed out in the air, creating a circular entrance. I can't maintain it for long. Hurry. With those words, the girl entered the circular entrance first. So Mok Jaeongun, puzzled, followed her inside. Swish. Then the smoke dispersed and the entrance disappeared. Shortly after, red haze rose mysteriously from the first floor, and then sand grains surged upward all at once, filling the place where Mok Jaeongun had been. Boom 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 boom. An irritated voice flowed from the mouth of the diviner Cho Taechong, who had his right hand forming a seal. Look at this fellow. The voice was quite hoarse. The diviner Cho Taechong shook his head and clicked his tongue. He had tried to make the one who dared to target him pay the price, but he had disappeared somewhere. Was it a diviner? He had felt considerable curse power from below for a moment. With this level, it could be seen as a skill almost reaching the level of a moon-level diviner. Then could it be that this was also an exorcism technique? Swish. Cho Tae-chong touched the back of his neck. The foreign sensation felt in his palm. It was because the flowing blood had stained his palm. Crunch. Cho Tae-chong gritted his teeth and spoke in a hoarse voice. If I hadn't switched, you would have had your neck sliced and died. At his words, Cho Tae-chong's body trembled, as if reacting to anger. Cho Tae-chong snorted and looked at the hole in the floor. Is it that guy? While struggling to protect himself, he couldn't properly see the guy's face. Cho Tae-chong looked at the hole in disbelief. Huh. Who the hell was this guy? Although he had been released from the time-space all-deception technique thanks to the unexpected variable of the wandering soul in the old shrine, he couldn't accurately perceive what had happened until then because all his senses and consciousness had been taken away. But he had come here right away? Could it be that he was conscious? Or did he notice because of that wandering soul? Whatever the case, one thing was certain. The guy had noticed what had happened in the old shrine and targeted him. Then he needed to find this guy quickly. If he were an ordinary person, he wouldn't dare to target him recklessly, but seeing him commit such a brazen act, he was quite a nuisance. Then someone hurriedly ran up the stairs and appeared. Are you I? It was a guard warrior guarding the stairs leading to the third floor. The warrior, who had been startled by the sudden roar and come up, couldn't hide his perplexity upon seeing Cho Tae-chong's face. What's that on your forehead? Oh my. You saw it. Pardon. It was right after those words ended. Stab. Ugh. Something sharp pierced through the guard warrior's chest and protruded out. The warrior, with his chest pierced, gasped for breath with eyes wide open as if they would tear apart, and then his head drooped as if he had lost all strength. Cho Tae-chong, who had been coldly watching him, looked up at the sky and said, "Find the guy. He couldn't have escaped far." Flap. As the order was given, the shadows that had been covering the surroundings disappeared with the sound of giant flapping wings. Swish. Mok Jae-eun looked puzzled as he watched the entrance disappear like smoke. He had learned various exorcism techniques, but this was the first time he had seen such a technique. As he was amazed, the girl spoke from behind. What's your identity? At that question, Mok Jae-eun turned his head. The short-haired girl in maid attire was standing with her arms crossed, looking at him with wide eyes as if in disbelief. So Mok Jae-eun looked around. Where is this? It's the kitchen. Even without an answer, it seemed obvious that this place was the kitchen. With the pots hanging on the walls and the chimney, anyone could tell this was the kitchen. Yes, it seems so. Is that all you have to say? Despite experiencing the disconnected space technique. No, that's not important. More importantly, I asked about your identity first. But you're quite handsome, aren't you? Pardon. Mok Jae-eun tilted his head at the girl's incoherent words. Then the girl approached Mok Jae-eun and stared at his face intently without hesitation. What's with this mortal wench? Chong Ryong spoke as if she was dissatisfied. So Mok Jae-eun asked in puzzlement. Are you going to keep staring like that? It's not like your face will wear out from looking. Can't I take a look? Mok Jae-eun shrugged his shoulders at her assertive attitude. Then he focused his spiritual sense and checked for any approaching presences. However, no presence was felt in the surroundings. Meanwhile, the girl smacked her lips and said, "Oh, what a pity. What a shame. Your face shows that you won't even reach adulthood and will have a short life." What? I said you have the fate of a short life. Your neck will either break or be cut off. If it weren't for that, you'd be the perfect husband for me. With those words, the girl giggled as if embarrassed, covering her flushed face with both hands. Chong Ryong was annoyed by her unpredictable attitude. I don't like this mortal wench for some reason. Is that so? In Mok Jae-eun's eyes, she just seemed like a lively girl. Of course, calling her a girl wasn't quite accurate given her curvaceous figure. She had a cute face and seemed to be around 17 or 18 years old at a glance. She appeared to be around the same age as him. Then the girl spoke. Anyway, what's your identity? Judging from your attire, you're not from the Primal Killing Pavilion, and you seem like an ordinary person, so why did it target you? By that you mean? That. But how should I explain this? It's really bothersome to explain this to an ordinary person, and they don't easily believe it, so it's difficult. Just tell me and I'll understand it in my own way. It'll be hard. Ordinary people usually can't accept such things. If I couldn't accept it, I would have had no reason to follow you through that smoke-made entrance earlier. Ah, is that so? What made you trust and follow me? Didn't she tell him to follow her? She seemed to have a rather inconsistent personality. So Mok Jae-eun said, "Your attire is that of a maid, but considering the technique earlier, are you perhaps a diviner? Oh, it seems you're not an ordinary person." At her question, Mok Jae-eun smiled brightly and replied, "I know a little. A little? You're just at the beginner level, yet it targeted you. By that, do you mean the evil spirit from earlier? It's not just a little. You're also someone from this field, right?" "This field?" "Yes, this field. Seeing as it targeted you, you're not from the Primal Killing Pavilion, right?" Although her way of speaking was difficult to understand, Mok Jae-eun could deduce two things from this question. This field seemed to refer to those who dealt with exorcism techniques. And she didn't seem to be from the Primal Killing Pavilion. If she were, she wouldn't have helped him in the earlier situation. So Mok Jae-eun nodded and said, "No, I'm not. Strictly speaking, he could be considered to be from here since he was a disciple of the current pavilion master of the Primal Killing Pavilion, the deceased Zhou Yuigong. However, saying so in this atmosphere would only make the girl more cautious of him." Mok Jae-eun's response was well-timed. The girl let out a sigh of relief and said, "Phew. That's a relief. I was worried that I might have gotten involved in an internal conflict at the Primal Killing Pavilion." "Is that so?" "It's not like that. It seemed that way. Otherwise, there's no way that cursed three-eyed bastard would try to kill you." "Three-eyed?" Mok Jae-eun asked in response to her words. "Did she just say three-eyed?" At Mok Jae-eun's question, the girl nodded and said, "Yes, three-eyed. The red falling star of Mount Kunlun, the evil spirit from earlier, is also a servant spirit controlled by that three-eyed bastard, right?" At her words, Mok Jae-eun's eyes narrowed. The diviner he had tried to kill earlier, no Cho Tae-chong, was called three-eyed? Mok Jae-eun suddenly recalled an incident from the corpse Blood Valley. So what exactly is this three-eyed thing? It's literally what it means. A three-eyed being. It's a malformed vessel born from a human womb. There are stories that when it's born it brings misfortune. Misfortune? But it's quite interesting. Even in ancient times, a three-eyed being would have been killed within a day of being born. I don't quite understand what you're saying, but are you saying that the diviner with the Taoist robe who has the three eyes left you here? Yes. I don't know what that bastard did, but after he visited no one could perceive me. That was the conversation he had with the monster raccoon dog that had been sealed in the scroll. Then was Cho Tae-chong, the chief disciple of the former Primal Killing Pavilion master in Seoke, the one responsible for trapping that monster raccoon dog with tremendous demonic power? At that moment, Chong Ryong's voice echoed in his ear. "Mortal. If what this wench is saying is true, it seems we've messed with quite a big shot." "A big shot? A spiritual beast." A diviner capable of sealing a spiritual beast is definitely not an ordinary person. With that level of skill, they would be considered a monster worthy of being called a divine diviner, the pinnacle of diviners. Divine diviner? Diviners are given titles according to their curse power and the level of their techniques. Divine, sun, moon technique, profound and conveying. The title bestowed upon only the six at the pinnacle. That is the title of divine. Diviners who received this title were limited to only 6 throughout the Central Plains, and they were known as the 6 divine diviners. Divine diviner. Was Cho Tae-chong truly at the level of a divine diviner as Chong Ryong said? As he was puzzled, Mok Jae-eun asked the girl, "Has the person you mentioned, the three-eyed, reached the level of a divine diviner? What are you talking about?" Suddenly, the girl pouted her lips and said, "Why was she reacting like this? How can a malformed vessel no different from an evil spirit be placed on the same level as my master?" "What?" One of Mok Jae-eun's eyebrows raised. Could it be that her master was a divine diviner? At Mok Jae-eun's question, the girl suddenly shrugged her shoulders and spoke with a proud expression. "Humph. Well, yes." He had suspected it, but it was really true. He had guessed that she wasn't an ordinary girl, but to think she had a divine diviner, the pinnacle of diviners, as her master. This was more surprising than he had thought. Then the girl said, Since you work in this field, you've probably heard of it. Have you heard of the Harmonious Immortal Pavilion? Master. Harmonious Immortal Pavilion Master? Mok Jiongun had no way of knowing. Although he had learned basic common sense through moon-level diviner Zhou Yuigong, he hadn't learned about which diviner groups were famous or who the 6 divine diviners were. Naturally, he didn't know, but when he didn't, the girl spoke in disbelief. What? You really don't know? Scarlet-tailed Old Immortal of the Harmonious Immortal Pavilion. Scarlet-tailed Old Immortal? No way. You really don't know? Are you sure you're from this field? Which pavilion are you from that you don't even know who my master is? Shoo. Huh. At Mok Jiongun's words, the girl unconsciously held her breath and closed her mouth. Wondering why he did that, Mok Jiongun looked towards the northeast. Then before long, startled, the girl furrowed her brows. That was because of the very faint demonic power felt from outside the building. This was the demonic power emitted by an evil spirit. The girl looked at Mok Jiongun with surprised eyes. What's with this person? He noticed this demonic power even before me. Chapter 171, Cho Taechong 3. Gasp. The girl looked at Mok Jiongun with startled eyes. What's with this person? He noticed this demonic energy even before I did. Among the beasts, those that reach the level of monsters become cunning enough to conceal and hide their own demonic energy. If such monsters intentionally conceal their demonic energy, it is difficult for average diviners to detect it, so she couldn't hide her surprise at him noticing it first. Could he be a diviner of the moon level or above? At first she had thought Mok Jiongun was a martial artist. That's why she helped him, thinking she might get assistance if she saved his life. However, upon closer inspection, he wasn't a martial artist but someone from the same industry. In that case, they might be able to communicate better. The girl whispered, "You're quite sensitive to demonic energy, aren't you? Is that so? I also just noticed this demonic energy. If you're this sensitive to detecting demonic energy, you're not an average diviner. Which pavilion are you from?" Shoo. Gulp. At this, the girl held her breath again and shut her mouth. Even while talking about this and that, she readily followed his instructions. At that moment, Chong Ryong spoke to Mok Jiongun. "Is it a Toru? Toru? The one that tried to trample and crush you with its hooves earlier?" There seems to be one more besides that. One more? It's Hume 1. Hume 1? Yes. Like Toru, it's also a beast from Kunlun Mountain. In some ways, it's much more difficult and dangerous to deal with than Toru. 2 beast at the monstrous level. It was a more troublesome situation than he thought. He had fought beasts at the monstrous beast level before, but this was his first time facing those at the higher than monstrous level. Thus, it was hard to gauge how powerful monsters were. Of course, he had broken through the wall and reached the transformation realm, so he didn't think he would be pushed back by beasts. He was just being cautious. At that moment, the girl clicked her tongue and said in a small voice, "2? So the rumors were true." Rumors? Yes. There were stories that the three-eyed uses 2 beasts at the monstrous level as his familiars. These words from her piqued Mok Jiongun's interest. This girl seemed to possess quite a lot of information, more than he expected. So Mok Jiongun asked, "But how did you enter this place?" "Pardon. From what I heard, you're not from the Primal Killing Pavilion but from the Harmonious Immortal Pavilion, right? You said you were from there, so why are you here in such attire?" Well, about that." At Mok Jiongun's question, the girl suddenly became restless. That was understandable, as she wasn't supposed to be here originally and was in a position where her identity couldn't be exposed. Unable to think of a suitable excuse, she hurriedly changed the subject. What about you? You're just as suspicious as me." "Suspicious?" "Yes. You're not from the Primal Killing Pavilion either. Moreover, that three-eyed tried to kill you using his familiars. How do you explain that?" "I don't know." "What?" "I simply tried to kill him because he threatened my life first." "Ah, so that was the reason." "Wait, what? You tried to kill the three-eyed?" The girl asked with wide eyes. "Is there something wrong with that?" "Rather than wrong, I'm just surprised that you tried to kill him." "Is that something to be surprised about?" "It is. Do you know how dangerous that wretched fiend is? And you tried to kill him alone. Is he that dangerous?" "Of course. It's said that 300 diviners who tried to subdue him were brutally slaughtered by his hands in a single night." 300 diviners were killed? Is his power strong enough to handle that many diviners alone? No, it made sense that average diviners couldn't handle him since he could single-handedly subdue and seal a spiritual beast. If I hadn't helped you earlier, you could have died too. Ah, thank you for that. At Mok Jiongun's words, she spoke with a puffed-up face. Your gratitude sounds quite dry for a thank you. How could that be? Never mind. Anyway, you're quite daring. To think you planned to kill such a monster alone. Even I, who possesses a protective talisman given by my master, only observe him from a distance. Mok Jiongun chuckled at her words. The girl had unintentionally revealed why she was here. Realizing this, her face turned red and she stamped her feet. Arg. How can you pry information out of others like this? You directly told me with your own mouth. I didn't pry it out. No, that's... Shoo. Please be quiet. If you continue being noisy like that, I think the monsters outside will notice. At this, the girl stopped stamping her feet and tightly shut her mouth. Being rowdy risked being discovered by the beasts. Mok Jiongun said to her, Anyway, you received orders from your master to monitor that three-eyed, right? That's right. Since she had already been exposed by her own words, there was no point in lying. The girl answered honestly. Is it for revenge? Revenge? Yes. Didn't you say he killed hundreds of diviners? Among that many diviners, there might have been some related to the girl or her so-called master. At this, the girl shook her head. Mok Jun asked in puzzlement. If not for revenge, then why are you monitoring that three-eyed? Because he's dangerous. Dangerous. I don't know the details either. My master only said that the three-eyed would soon disrupt the heavenly chi, so I received orders to monitor him. Heavenly chi? Heavenly chi refers to the energy of the heavens. In sorcery, heavenly chi signifies things like fate, the principles of the world, or its flow. Such heavenly chi should flow according to a predetermined course, and if it is disrupted, the world becomes precarious. Yes, heavenly chi. Anyway, I'm here for a righteous cause, not personal reasons. So don't even think about interfering. Did I interfere? Things got complicated like this because I tried to save you. Do you know how hard it was for me to infiltrate this place? The girl pointed to her maid attire. He could roughly guess how she had infiltrated there. I see. Is that all you have to say? Sigh, I should have just left you to die or live. The girl clicked her tongue and spoke. At this, Mok Jun chuckled and asked, Come to think of it, I don't know your name. My name? All right. My name is... Oh wait. If you're going to ask a lady's name, shouldn't you reveal your name first? Mok Jiongun. Mok Jiongun? Yes. Mok is an unusual family name. I'm Yeo Surin. Yeo Surin? That's a pretty name. You think it's pretty? Yes. Do you think I'll be pleased with such flattery? Contrary to her words, she covered her reddened cheeks with both hands, feeling shy. What a simple-minded wench. Indeed. She seemed to be the type whose emotions were easily visible, just as they appeared. Of course, Mok Jiongun didn't mind this and immediately changed the subject to the main point. Miss Yeo, you said this is the kitchen earlier. How far is it from the main hall of the primal killing pavilion? Pardon? Judging from how quickly the beast chased after us, it doesn't seem too far. At Mok Jiongun's words, Yeo Surin answered with intrigued eyes. You're quite perceptive, aren't you? That's right. This place is about 100 jang away from the main hall. 100 jang? It was neither a long nor a short distance. So Mok Jiongun asked, couldn't you have gone further with that technique you used to create the entrance earlier? Sheesh, do you think it's that easy? It was barely possible thanks to this treasure my master gave me. Yeo Surin showed the 2 connected rings worn on her fingers. It was a silver-colored item with 2 luminous green jades embedded in each ring. Judging from the extraordinary energy emanating from it, he understood why she called it a treasure. So you used that to create a connecting door that shortened the distance to this place? That's right. It seems quite convenient. Even if it looks convenient, it has a few drawbacks. Drawbacks? What are they? If you don't preset a medium to the desired location in advance, it can only travel about 20 jang, not 100. 20 jang? That's a significant decrease. It was reduced to not even half but close to 1/5. That's why I said there are a few drawbacks. I see. Are there any other drawbacks? Other drawbacks? Apart from that, after using it twice in a row, you have to wait at least a quarter hour before you can use the treasure again. It seemed to have several limitations despite its convenience. Well, if such a treasure had no restrictions on distance or time, it would be the most dangerous item. However, if used well depending on the situation, it seemed quite useful. It's a nice item. Perhaps sensing Mok Jae-un's gaze, Yeo Su-rin took off the rings she was wearing and put them in her bosom, speaking as if warning him. Just in case, let me make this clear. Don't covet this. It's a treasure that no one but me can use. No one else can use it? Yes. If it gets more than 1 zhang away from me, its power will weaken and it will break. So I'm telling you not to covet it in vain. Ah. At Yeo Su-rin's words, Mok Jae-un inwardly clicked his tongue. He had thought of killing her and taking it, but if that was the case there was no point. He had found it strange that she explained the treasure in detail to someone she was meeting for the first time, naive as it may be. It had some safeguards in place so she could talk about it. If that was the case, she might be hiding some of the drawbacks. Although she seemed talkative and had a fluctuating personality, this woman wasn't stupid. Sorcery was a quite complex field of study, so one couldn't master it without basic intelligence. Considering that, he believed she was definitely hiding something. The more gaps she seemed to have, the more cautious one should be. That was Mok Jae-un's belief. At that moment, Yeo Su-rin quietly said, I think a quarter hour has passed. Ah, you can use that now. Yes. The beasts still seem to be searching for us outside, so let's move about 20 zhang at a time. Fortunately, there are nearby buildings within 20 zhang, so if we take some time, we can leave the primal killing pavilion. I see. Since the three-eyed is greatly angered, it would be best not to catch his attention for the time being. With those words, Yeo Su-rin put on the treasure on her index and middle fingers. She was about to inject her power into the treasure and use it, but... Wait a minute. Yes. Is this possible too? What do you mean by this? At her question, Mok Jae-un spoke with the corners of his mouth twitching. Thud. The head of diviner Zhou Yuigong rolled on the floor from a kick. Cho Tae-chong, who had kicked his head, spoke with a slightly flushed face. It was the same guy. Then his facial muscles moved irregularly and soon a hoarse voice came out. I see. Diviner Zhou Yuigong, bound in the pavilion master's room. He had tried to find out who had placed the chains of incantation through the blood-solving goo. But he was found with his head cut off, dead. That meant one conclusion could be drawn. It was one guy. Everything was done by the same fellow. The one who had manipulated the greedy disciple Zhou Yuigong to control the primal killing pavilion while he was away, the one related to the vengeful spirit of the Chongryong level or above, and the one who had boldly come to him and threatened his life. It was all the same guy. Crack crack. Cho Tae-chong, whose face had returned to normal, raised the corners of his mouth bitterly and muttered. It's been a while since I've had a worthwhile hunt. He had been hiding in the shadows, concealing himself. But to dare to touch him like this, what a fearless fellow. It seemed he would have to enjoy the hunt after a long time. Run away if you can. It'll still be within my grasp. Swoosh. At that moment, Cho Tae-chong's eyes wavered. Something sharp and black pierced through the floor, grazed past his right elbow and shot upward. And with a burning sensation. Thud. His right arm fell to the floor. Cuff. Cho Tae-chong's face contorted in immense pain as his arm was severed. In an instant he was dumbfounded. He thought the guy had run away, but he came back? This bastard. He was an unbelievably cunning fellow. Normally, if an assassination failed, one would hide or continue to attempt escape to save their life. But he appeared again and sniped at him from a distance below the lower floor. What kind of guy was this? Grit. I'll kill him. Cho Tae-chong's facial muscles twitched as he glared at the floor, and soon his forehead began to split. Hover. Whoosh. A strange power was felt from above. As Cho Tae-chong unconsciously tried to raise his head. Swish. Someone fell from above and stabbed a dagger into his splitting forehead with lightning speed. Stab. Black blood and white fluid flowed from his splitting forehead. The one who fell from above somersaulted and landed on the floor. Tap. The person who had their face covered with a black cloth was none other than Mok Jae-un. Phew. Mok Jae-un looked at Cho Tae-chong, who was staggering with a dagger stuck in his forehead, and raised the corners of his mouth bitterly. Ha. Yeo Surin, who was watching this scene through the round door of smoke opened near the ceiling of the fourth floor, was stunned. Chapter 172, Cho Taechong 4. From the round entrance of smoke near the ceiling, Yeo Surin clicked her tongue. She didn't expect this to actually work. When she first heard Mok Jae-un's plan, she thought he was crazy. What? You want to go back to that person? Yes. Are you insane? We barely escaped and you want to go back? If you get caught this time you might die. The three-eyed, known as the Wretched Fiend. The number of diviners who died by his hands was too many to count. Yet he said he would return to such a person. He must be out of his mind. Even if I die I won't regret it. No, that's not the issue. I saved you and now you're saying you'll die again. Do you think I'll just agree and let you do that? But if we miss this opportunity when his familiars aren't by his side, it will be harder to kill him later. At Mok Jae-un's words, Yeo Surin became genuinely concerned. Does he really believe he can kill that monster? If it were possible, the three-eyed would have died long ago. Please, I'm begging you. Let's just go. If you don't help me, I have no choice. I'll have to go back alone. Are you threatening me now? Threatening? I only said I'd go alone. That's a threat. You're trying to stimulate my tender, pure sympathy, aren't you? Not to that extent. How annoying. Yeo Surin clicked her tongue. Two beasts at the monstrous level were guarding outside. If he went out like this, his body might be torn to shreds and become food for those two monsters. Ignoring him and leaving felt truly unsettling. Arg. I should have just passed by earlier. Why did I have to save a stubborn person like you? You never know. What? If things go well and the three-eyed dies, your master's concerns will be resolved, and you won't have to push yourself to hide and monitor here anymore. You're really confident. You won't know until you try. Mok Jae-un smiled brightly. Seeing him like this made her burst with frustration. Why are men so insistent on trying things before knowing if it's dung or sauce? Yeo Surin shook her head and said, I don't know. If you want to die so badly, do as you wish. I'll bet on you failing, crying and regretting it. What if I succeed? What? What will you do if I succeed? No, why is he showing such confidence? Does he have some hidden trump card? Sigh. After staring at Mok Jae-un for a while, she took something out of her bosom and showed it. It resembled the treasure she wore on her index and middle fingers. What's that? If you succeed, I'll give you this. You had two of them. No, this is a spare my master gave me in case I lose the treasure. A spare. Yes. It can only be used once. But it can open a door anywhere within a radius of about 200 zhang. Oh. You're probably filled with greed again, right? How could I not be? You're honest. Anyway, if you succeed, I'll give you this. It was a temporary treasure prepared for an emergency, which could only be used once. If by any chance this man could really kill the three-eyed, she wouldn't need to monitor him anymore according to her master's orders, and she wouldn't be in danger. Yeo Surin grabbed the sleeve of Mok Jae-un's arm and said, If you want this, then make sure to succeed. I really don't want to see you trying to commit suicide after I saved you. I'll have to succeed even if it's just to get what you're offering. I guess you're more interested in the leftovers than the main dish. You're quite unusual. Sai, so what's the plan? I have no intention of helping if I feel like I'll be in danger. Just open the entrance. What? As long as you open it at the exact location I specify at the moment I give the signal. And close it right away since it's dangerous. Is that really all you need? Yes, that's all. What is he thinking? Is that really enough? It was truly puzzling for her. However, this person knows martial arts. It was a part Yeo Surin hadn't predicted at all. She was convinced that Mok Jae-un, who was knowledgeable about sorcery and techniques, must be a diviner from the same industry. But she couldn't help but be surprised by his martial arts skills that surpassed her expectations. She had heard that only martial artists with quite advanced skills could send sharp energy from a sword over a long distance. Yet Mok Jae-un was capable of that. Could it be that he's not a diviner but a martial artist? Just seeing him somersault and land, he was far from ordinary people. Who exactly is this person? Did he learn both sorcery and martial arts? At that moment, Mok Jae-un raised his head and looked at Yeo Surin. Seeing him like this, she clicked her tongue. He's telling me to give it to him. Yeo Surin immediately understood why Mok Jae-un was looking at her. In a situation where his life might be in danger if he failed, he hadn't forgotten about this. He must have really coveted it. Impressive. Truly impressive. So she put her hand in her bosom and took out the spare treasure. Then she glanced at Cho Tae-chong, who had collapsed on the floor, staggering. No matter how outstanding a diviner or a wretched fiend he was, he wouldn't be able to avoid death with a dagger deeply embedded in his third eye before it could fully open. With that catch. Swish. Mok Jang-un caught the spare ring treasure she threw. Although his face was covered like a mask with a black cloth, the corners of his mouth slightly rose. Even if it could only be used once, it was sufficiently valuable. He had to kill the enemy anyway, so getting this on top of that was quite a bonus. Mok Jan looked through the door of smoke open in the ceiling and said, "Aren't you coming over?" At Mok Jae-un's question, Yeo Su-rin slightly poked her head out and said, "He's definitely dead, right?" At that moment Chong Ryong let out a sigh. Mok Jae-un asked in puzzlement, "Why are you sighing?" "That wretched girl said something inauspicious." "What do you mean?" "Keep this in mind. After fighting an enemy, it's best to avoid saying things like, 'He's dead, right?' 'Is he dead?' Or, 'Did you get rid of him?' Is that a problem? In my long experience, when someone says such useless things, it's an ominous sign." Crack. Before Chong Ryong could finish speaking. At that moment, the body of Cho Tae-chong, who had collapsed with a dagger stuck in his head, stood up straight as if someone had lifted him. "Be careful." Yeo Su-rin hurriedly formed a simple hand seal with her left hand. Lim. Byong. Gi. Jin. 5 spirits heavy strike technique. As she extended her hand, a huge pillar of energy shaped like a beam descended upon Cho Tae-chong, whose body had been lifted. It had the force to instantly flatten Cho Tae-chong's body. Hover. Crack. Before it could even touch him, it was split into a cross shape. Gasp. What was happening? The power emanating from Cho Tae-chong was beyond imagination. It possessed an ominous and evil energy that was hard to believe belonged to a human. At that moment, Cho Tae-chong reached out his left hand towards Yeo Su-rin. Then Yeo Su-rin's body on the ceiling was about to be pulled towards him. How persistent. Swish. However, in that instant, Mok Jae-un used his clear and manifest water crossing steps to appear in front and tried to cut off Cho Tae-chong's left arm with the evil commandment sword. But at that moment, roar. The surroundings were shrouded in dark shadows, and Mok Jae-un's movements froze in place. All his senses were lost, and once again, everything except his consciousness was taken away. In this situation, Mok Jae-un saw Cho Tae-chong's strange state. With his eyes rolled back and a dagger embedded in his forehead, he was no different from a dead person. Yet how could he move in this situation? Moreover, he seemed to have no consciousness at all. It was then. Crack. Crack. At that moment, something appeared as Cho Tae-chong's cheeks split open. It was none other than an injured eyeball. The center of the eyeball was sunken as if stabbed by something, and black blood flowed from it. Could it be? As he thought that, Cho Tae-chong opened his mouth, staggering with a hoarse voice. "You damn human, how dare you stab my eye?" That voice was filled with anger and murderous intent. Seeing him like this, Mok Jae-un, with only his consciousness alive, inwardly clicked his tongue. Considering he was alive despite his eye being stabbed and a dagger penetrating his brain, he was already a being that could hardly be considered human. It seemed there was a reason he was called a wretched fiend. "I'll make you feel the same pain." With those words, Cho Tae-chong snatched the evil commandment sword from Mok Jae-un's hand. And as he gripped the hilt, flinch, tremble. At that moment, Cho Tae-chong's injured eyeball trembled. What's with this sword? Suddenly, a spiritual energy trying to interfere with his consciousness through the sword's hilt made Cho Tae-chong hurriedly try to let go of the sword. It was at that very moment. Swoosh. Coup. In a brief instant, Cho Tae-chong's neck was severed. Thanks to the interference with his consciousness, his power was disrupted for a moment. Mok Jae-un didn't miss that moment. In that fleeting instant when his senses temporarily returned, he cut off the guy's neck. "You're quite unlucky." He finally had a chance to kill him, but when he tried to take revenge by grasping the demonic sword, the evil commandment sword, he suffered a setback. Thud. Ah. At that moment, Yeo Su-rin, who fell from the ceiling to the floor and landed on her bottom, was dumbfounded. Ouch my butt. What's going on? Eek. She couldn't hide her bewilderment upon seeing Cho Taechong's severed neck. What on earth had happened? It felt like only her time had stopped for a moment and then flowed again. It was as if the flow had been cut off. Changrong clicked his tongue and said, "What a truly bizarre fellow. To revive even after the source of his energy was stabbed and his brain was penetrated. He had a truly tenacious vitality that could no longer be considered human but an beast. But now that his neck was severed, it would be difficult for him to truly revive. Or so he believed, but a strange thing was happening inside Cho Taechong's severed head. Thump, thump. The third eye with blood vessels rising. Unlike the dead body, that eye possessed its own sense of self. Damn it. It was a clear mistake. When his senses were taken away, he should have killed this bastard without caring about the repercussions of losing his body. But he messed up because of that damn demonic sword. With just this head, it was impossible to deal with that guy. Now that it had come to this, the only answer was to play dead, wait and find a new body. Just you wait. Even though he hadn't seen his face, he remembered his voice. The moment he found a new body, he would definitely kill him. Squish. Right at that moment, Cho Taechong's head was crushed. It was because Mok Jae-un had stepped on the head. What are you doing now? Making sure. Yeo Su-rin protested, unable to bear the sight of the head being crushed, but Mok Jae-un ignored her and continued to step on Cho Taechong's head. Squish. Squish. Then he put his hand into the crushed, miserable thing and took something out. It was none other than the eyeball. This bastard. The blood vessels in the eyeball were raised and trembling wildly. Looking at this eyeball, Mok Jae-un chuckled and said, "I had a hunch, but it seems to be an independent existence separate from the dead body." At these words, the eyeball couldn't hide its inner bewilderment. This bastard had noticed its true nature. Until now, even diviners hadn't detected it, but its existence was exposed to a guy like this? Creak. Then so be it. It's commendable that you noticed my existence, but you made one mistake. You should have at least avoided direct contact with me. Splat. Splat. At that moment, blood vessels shot out from the eyeball and dug into the flesh of Mok Jae-un's fingers. "I'll take over your body like this." Arg. Sizzle. The blood vessels that had dug into the flesh were soon burned. Poison. The eyeball was dumbfounded. It had tried to penetrate his skin and consume his blood and nerves. But this bastard's blood was poison itself. The poisonous energy coming through the blood vessels was too painful. Shrink. The eyeball trembled and twisted in agony. Seeing this, Yeo Su-rin said with wide eyes, "The eyeball seems to be suffering and shrinking."